Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, last year when we did this episode, we had a favorite moment of the year where you reacted to the signing of a nose tackle. Sadly, we didn't get your reaction on the release of the nose tackle this year, but we tried.
Well, a couple of things. One, I was right. Two,
most importantly, let's start off with that.
Let's. Did I swear when they signed Dalvin Tomlinson?
Yes, you did.
Well, my take was that Dalvin Tomlinson was a better player than Michael Pierce, too, but also that there's no reason to have two nose tackles on a roster, and also that seems to be the Vikings implication. I'm a little bit of a hypocrite here. That shouldn't come as a huge surprise, but using the fact that the Vikings did something as proof that I was right versus saying that when the Vikings do something I disagree with, that's not proof I'm wrong. I'm comfortable in this hypocrisy because I think here it means the Vikings saw the error of their ways. But
as long as it benefits you and your,
right.
That actually,
yeah, we're good.
Yeah, that sounds like every take you've ever had on this show, actually.
Yeah, because I'm always right. Yeah, of course. So it was untenable for the Vikings to have two nose tackles on the roster. I presume that they see Dalvin Tomlinson that way. Harrison Phillips is the one that they signed. Essentially, that is. I don't know if replacing is the right word, but is kind of like a one-for-one. You add a defensive tackle, you lose a defensive tackle. I don't know kind of what position, defensive end or nose tackle that they expect him to play, or whether they expect him to play, the 5 technique, which is a little bit rarer now in football, or the 4 technique at defensive end. I don't expect him really to be a nose tackle. I mean, he's something like 305 pounds or something like that. But as I pointed out in my combine metrics piece about the way that Ed Donatel and Vic Fangio style defenses are built, the defensive tackles in that system tend to be a little bit smaller than the NFL average. So you could, in theory, have something like that. But I do think that you're likely going to get a guy that can play 3-4 end, and then occasionally will play nose tackle because of how strong he is and how much of a run stuffer he is and how good he is at that role. It is a much cheaper deal than the Michael Pierce deal. And if we view it as something like kind of a replacement, like Michael Pierce is replaced by Dalvin Tomlinson, who's replaced by Harrison Phillips, then you can kind of see, what the cap savings there are. But we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. We are back because there is a lot of stuff to report on. There's quite a bit, including the Kirk Cousins extension that seemed inevitable, and then it happened. Then there is some comings and goings, and we have, of course, the mailbag, which is chocked full of football content specific about Kirk Cousins, the current regime, and why decisions were made. And decisions were made. So we'll get into all of that in here in just a moment. Thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to support us financially, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go over to patreon.com/Norse Code, and for $3.50 a month, you can get access to bonus material, which will include a bonus episode coming out later this week from outtakes and behind the show stuff from the last couple of weeks. Also, you get access to the Norse Code Discord, which has been fun because I didn't ban him. I gave Kyle Slaby a timeout. He knows what he did. But we have
join our Discord server to learn more about the things that James and I can do to you.
We did this while recording, so the bonus episode is going to have something good on it. So anyway, check us out over at patreon.com/Norse Code. You can also help us over at paypal.me/Norse Code if you'd just like to do a one-time donation. Totally cool. All this stuff keeps us ad-free. All this stuff keeps it so that we're able to do cool stuff like do the live shows and get new gear. I'm actually looking at a new boom arm for my microphone that because my old one broke last episode. So thank you guys so much for supporting the show. Thank you guys so much for allowing us to be able to do this and remain ad-free. You can also go to norsecode.threadless.com as well. You can pick up a shirt. You can pick up a baby onesie, whatever you need with our fantastic logo on it from Draw Play Dave. Check it out, please. Also, just as a quick mention, you were featured on the Draw Play recently. So if you wanted to see Arif in a presser with Roger Goodell, check it out over at thedrawplay.com. And at DrawPlayDave, I believe, is still his Twitter handle.
I can't think of a more embarrassing Draw Play comic for me.
For you.
Right. I mean, he's drawn more embarrassing ones for him.
Well, yes. I can think of a couple off the top of my head, especially from the KSK days.
Oh, well, yes. I really just meant in the last year, but yeah, absolutely, yes. But the grinding ones are special.
Well, those are kind of like the retired jersey, in my opinion. Like you can't compare their stats to current players. Like they're Hall of Fame worthy. They're just they played in a different era. They played in a different era. But go ahead and check that out as well. All right, all of these things are now done. Let's get into the main reason why we are recording. Kirk Cousins has been extended. He is no longer as bad of a cap hit as it was looking for next year. And this one's got people upset. And I think that's a bit of an understatement almost. Just listening to the discourse online, listening to the discourse by fans just in person, things... Kirk Cousins...
to the discourse in the Discord.
Yeah, the discourse in the Discord. This is something that has triggered a number of us. And you can say that the Vikings aren't really better as a result of this. You could also say, at the same time, the Vikings are also worse as a result of this.
Yeah. So the issue here is that there's not really much of a question that this move improves the Vikings' odds of winning in 2022. That's not really the concern, because it does, in theory, do that versus trading Kirk Cousins versus keeping him at his current cap number, technically releasing him as an option, although the salary is basically fully guaranteed, so it wouldn't do anything. But, of all the moves that you can make, this one technically does increase your chances of winning in 2022. The real question is if it's worth it. But before I get into that and how upset people are, I do want to talk about the nature of the contract, because it's kind of weird to think the Vikings added a year onto his contract. Kirk Cousins gets to pocket $35 million more, and also the cap hit decreases. Well, how does that happen? How do the Vikings erase almost $14 million off of Kirk Cousins' cap hit and free up almost $14 million of cap space? And so it's because of the way that NFL contracts have been trending for big players, which includes something called a void year, which we've talked about a little bit before, but just to kind of recap. So Kirk Cousins has a 1-year extension that is treated in the books like a 3-year extension. It just so happens that in the language of the contract, the final 2 years are voided automatically. Unless they sign a new contract, which will get rid of that language. So Kirk Cousins adds $35 million to his take-home pay, meaning he earns $70 million over the next 2 years, because he was set to earn $35 million this year. The $45 million cap hit comes from the impact of a signing bonus where he had collected the money a couple years before that. So from a cap perspective, it drops his cap hit from $45 million to $31.4 million. And then in 2023, he has a cap hit of $36.3 million. So in order to spread out the signing bonus and actually help facilitate that decrease in cap hit, to make sure that his cap hit actually goes down while he ends up with more money, the Vikings added 2 automatically voided years to the end of the contract. So what happens is, at the beginning of the 2024 league year, he is automatically cut, right? That's just the way the contract works. He's automatically cut. If they hadn't added those 2 years to the contract, then the signing bonus impact of his current deal, of the extension he just signed, the signing bonus, instead of adding $6.25 million to the cap, would add $12.5 million. So his cap hit, if they did not add these 2 years to the contract, his cap hit, instead of being $31.4 million, would be $37.6 million, essentially $37.7, something like that. Which that only frees up $8 million of space. That does not seem particularly worth it. So what they did is, because the way the signing bonus works out, when you pay a player a signing bonus, that player essentially, this isn't technically true, but essentially receives that money right away. It's like cash in hand, right? Now, teams will work out methods of distributing cash flow to make it a little bit easier for the person writing the check to actually have the cash on hand. That's a little bit less of a concern for somebody like Zygi Wilf and more of a concern for somebody like Mark Davis. But the point is that they get that money on day one and they get to take it home and do whatever they want with it, right? They could, buy a house, convert it into Bitcoin, invest it, who cares? But the impact that has on the cap is not as if you dropped the signing bonus that year. Otherwise, the cap hit would be untenable for new players, and the signing bonus as a contract mechanism would disappear. And so what a signing bonus essentially spreads out the cap impact of the signing bonus over the next 5 years or the life of the contract, whichever is shorter. And so you can't sign somebody for 40 years and spread the signing bonus out over those 40 years. It's 5 years is the max. The cap hit, so the signing bonus is $25 million is the signing bonus. But the Vikings only have to account for that this year to an order of $6.25 million. And so that's how Kirk Cousins gets some take-home money this year. Plus his base salary and plus his roster bonus, which is going to come for him on September 9th or whenever the league year starts or whenever the season starts. So that's why those void years exist, because of the mechanism in the CBA that spreads out the cap hit of something like a signing bonus. The cost of that, it's not magic, right? The cost of that is technically Kirk Cousins right now has a cap liability of at least $6.25 million in 2024 and $6.25 million in 2025. That's what it looks like on paper. It's actually technically higher because I think the Vikings have to owe him the league minimum salary or something like that. It doesn't matter, right? He technically has something like maybe a $7 million cap hit in 2024 and something like that in 2025. Okay, great. But when you cut a player, any guaranteed money, which includes the signing bonus, any guaranteed money turns into a cap liability the next league year. So if Kirk Cousins is cut after the 2023 season, but before the 2024 season technically starts, any money that was guaranteed on his contract that was going to be part of his cap liability accelerates into the 2024 season. And guess what? He is automatically cut in 2024. So that $6.25 million spread out over 2024 and 2025 become the cap hit in 2024. And so that's $12.5 million that the Vikings have to account for in their cap calculation that they don't have, that they have less of in terms of their cap space in 2024 because of the nature of this contract. Now, if they signed a new deal with Kirk Cousins at the conclusion of the 2023 season before the 2024 season began, they could potentially avoid this. But, I mean, they can't get out of the $6.25 million, but they can get out of the dead space of the other $6.25 million. Either way. So that's how that mechanism works. So the Vikings only functionally hold on to Kirk Cousins for the next 2 years, including this year. That means, of course, that the Vikings seem fairly interested in running it back. The question then is it worth it? They're essentially a 500 team over the last 2 years, albeit under a different regime, under Mike Zimmer, right? And so the question is, the Wilfs must think that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell are superior enough to their replacements to turn what was an 8-9 team into a 10-7, 11-6 team. And maybe, luck is involved too, but if luck was a huge factor in the Wilfs' minds, then they wouldn't have fired Zimmer, right? But so they must think that Kevin O'Connell is that much better of a coach that can take essentially what is the same roster and make it better. The problem is it's not the same roster, right? Not only is the roster a year older and these players are different, you are like a bunch of players, like 5 or 6 starters are hitting or have hit free agency, right? So obviously you don't have Rashad Breeland anymore, but that is that's fine. No one's upset about that. And you don't have Everson Griffin anymore, but that was kind of to be expected. And so what other starters are you missing? You're missing Patrick Peterson. You're missing Mackenzie Alexander. You're missing Xavier Woods. We'll talk about him in a second. You're missing Anthony Barr, probably. I guess we already talked about him. You're missing a lot of starters, right? And you don't have an edge rusher opposite Danielle Hunter. You don't have a solution at guard. And so it's not the same roster as last year. It's worse. And so the goal of the Kirk Cousins extension is to improve the roster, even though it only really frees up $14 million. And there's a lot of players that you have to figure out. So you have to say, hey, Michael Pierce was not a significant component to the roster. We got to cut him. Hey, Danielle Hunter, that cap space is a big issue. We have to restructure him, right? And so as it stands right now, the Vikings roster, which is incomplete, but let's say they have a good draft class, not a great one, but like a good draft class. I would venture to say that the roster as it stands, plus a pretty decent draft class, would not make the Vikings an 8-9 team. I think it would make them worse than that. And so they have to make a bunch of other moves that they think that they can be better at than Rick Spielman would have been with Mike Zimmer. And that's probably the case, but I don't know if they're going to be better enough moves. And so what's really happening in a lot of fans' minds, and I think fair, right? This is essentially the argument that I've been making all offseason. But the argument is the Vikings getting marginally better is not meaningful because they either won't make the playoffs or they'll be one and done in the playoffs. It kind of doesn't matter. The point is to win the Super Bowl, or at least threaten to win the Super Bowl, right? Like, maybe some people have some more realistic expectations and just want the team to be like fun, right? And this does not maximize those odds, backing into the playoffs and then losing there just to see another better team win the Super Bowl again. So that's the issue, right? Is that it commits the Vikings to winning now in a world where winning now is a very mediocre outcome. So I get it, and I kind of agree with it. The next question, the one I've been getting a lot, I didn't actually see this like word for word in the mailbag, but I did see a version of this question, which is why fire the previous regime if you're just going to run it back? Thanks for asking that question, Nick Howard. But it does bring up the question, like, then what's the difference? Like, I can't imagine that Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman would have made a different decision. And they would have. Or something like that. Maybe I shouldn't say they would have. It is a different character of decision given all that, because if you'll remember from Chad Graff's piece, and I think there's a couple of other pieces that kind of leaked it out, Mike Zimmer openly did not like Kirk Cousins, and if you are keeping Kirk Cousins, you can't have that with your head coach. So even if you're going to make all the same moves, there is a reason to move on from your head coach. But I essentially agree that this was a decision that maintains the status quo, when the whole reason you fire not just a head coach, but the entire operation is because they were underperforming. And so, like, why would you maintain the status quo if they're underperforming? I suspect that we would have seen more discussion about the possibility of moving Kirk Cousins that was well sourced, instead of discussion just coming from Twitter and the blogosphere and podcasts like this one. Instead of discussion about a trade coming from that, I think we would have seen more trade discussion come from people who were talking about what the Vikings were thinking if the Wilfs were more inclined to trade Kirk Cousins. They made it very clear in the post-hiring presser, after hiring Adolfo Mensa and after hiring Kevin O'Connell, in both of those pressers, that they themselves thought that the Vikings were well built enough to run it back. And I think that feeling drove A, who they were going to hire, even though they said it didn't, and B, how they're going to manage the franchise, essentially. Because you remember, the Wilfs are sometimes fairly involved in quarterback decisions, not immensely involved, not like Dan Snyder involved, but they were in the room when the Vikings needed to select a quarterback in 2014. And my understanding is that they were also involved, and this could be a little bit wrong because it was so long ago, my memory might be hazy, also involved in 2011 with the Christian Ponder.
Yes,
pick.
That was something that was reported at the time, that they were involved in that, and also there was rumor that they were involved in wanting to have a stepping stone for Ponder in the way of Mr. McNabb. Right.
And so they play a role in the franchise. They're not a completely hands-off ownership group. And in 2014, they needed assurance, essentially, that if the Vikings were going to pick Johnny Manziel, that, they would be comfortable with that. Now, that doesn't mean they would have picked Johnny Manziel had they been able to execute that trade. I'm not reporting that. I'm just saying that the Wilfs knew that picking Johnny Manziel was a possibility and wanted to be involved in a decision regarding that one way or the other. So we know that they're involved in quarterback decisions. They're probably not involved in decisions like drafting a corner or signing a defensive tackle or anything like that, but we know that they're involved in quarterback decisions. So I am guessing that the Vikings would have been more open to the possibility of a trade in a world where the Wilfs were a little bit more hands-off. It's a guess. I'm not reporting. I don't know anything about what the Wilfs are thinking, aside from what they've said publicly. That ties the hands of someone like Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. Now, he could have been totally on board. They might have hired him because he thought that Kirk Cousins was good enough. They might have hired Kevin O'Connell because they thought Kirk Cousins was good enough. So that's not saying that, Adofo-Mensah tried to make a move and he was blocked. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is we are structurally set up to have a Kirk Cousins extension, and that there is not a huge menu of options available to whatever regime comes in within that perspective. And that's only if the other thing I'm saying is true, right? If the Wilfs were so committed to the idea of running it back. So that's my understanding. I'm being very careful in my language here because I don't want it to be seen as I'm reporting. I'm speculating a lot based off of the of paying attention to the team over the last 10 years. So that's my read on the situation, is that it was inevitable because the guy who signs all the checks wanted it to happen. And that either means you hire people that make it happen, or you hire people and let them know that that's what's going to happen, right? Like, those are your two options, right? So the point of a general manager is that you can blame them. So I wouldn't say don't be too harsh on Kwesi Adofo-Mensah if you don't agree with this move, because that's his job. It's to be the guy that basically, like, how Roger Goodell makes a bunch of unpopular decisions and everyone gets mad at him. That's what he's there for. That's why they hired him, so that people will be mad at him and not at the 31 league owners, plus the Packers president. 31,000 league owners.
Actually, if they could just be mad at Justice specifically.
Yeah, Justice Mosqueda specifically. Yeah, I'm going to ask Justice why he voted for Roger Goodell. That was a screw you, Justice. So that's kind of what's happening there from my read on it. Now, Kirk Cousins at $31 million is not bad. I know that that's kind of, that direction of a take is not like the world's most, I don't want to say popular, because it's not an unpopular opinion, right? Like, because the concern people have isn't that Kirk Cousins isn't worth that in the modern cap environment, but rather that we should not be asking this question at all, because unless Kirk Cousins is willing to play for $20 million, you can't build a good enough roster to win a Super Bowl with his type of play, right? Is the take that a lot of people have. So I get it, right? But just in terms of pure wins per dollar, that's not bad, honestly. It was like 15% of the cap or something like that. Actually, Over the Cap has started including cap percentage, in which, thank you, Jason Fitzgerald. You run a great website. I love it. Although The Athletic, I believe, is partnered in some way with SpotTrack. So visit SpotTrack.com for all your cap needs. Anyway, OverTheCap.com says that Kirk Cousins consumes 15% of the cap. Now, I remember, people saying that no team has won the Super Bowl with a quarterback that consumed more than 15% of the cap, or more than 14 or 12% of the cap. Some number. I don't care. The number is unimportant to me right now for the point I'm about to make, which is that number is skewed by Tom Brady, who is also running it back, unfortunately for teams in the NFC. But that is, I think, kind of not particularly elegant analysis, because it draws on essentially a very, very small sample size, right? If you look at the cap hit of like the other team in the Super Bowl, you kind of see it falls apart a little bit. Like, I don't know, for example, in the Falcons Patriots Super Bowl, that you would be doing a bad thing taking a look at what the Falcons did to get there and building a team around that. Like, just because the Patriots happen to mount the greatest comeback of all time does not mean that Matt Ryan's cap hit was the problem with the Falcons team, right? And so if you take a look at Super Bowl participants, right, that kind of goes away. Now, you don't have anybody at 20%, which is what Cousins was at, right, at one point, but you do have some at 16%. I think there was at least one at 18%. You have a bunch at 14%. So 15% is fine for a quarterback like Cousins, who is probably better than the 11th best quarterback in the NFL. He's probably a top 10 quarterback. We had this discussion about Matthew Stafford versus Kirk Cousins. Not going to rehash it. You can just listen to that episode. But for $31 million, it's difficult to find a quarterback as good as Kirk Cousins. So from a pure wins per dollar perspective, which is not really, I think, the right perspective here, this is not bad. But that's that's not the reason people are upset. But yeah, 15%, not bad.
So this puts the organization into an interesting spot. And there were a lot of whispers over the past couple of, I say weeks, but really the last few days, about teams that Deshaun Watson may or may not go to. A lot of Vikings fans were upset at the idea that they could potentially go and grab him. And in the end, Watson is going to play somewhere warm and get booed on the field there, and not in Minnesota. And Minnesota is, you're not doing anything to improve. I guess I wonder, do you feel like the Aaron Rodgers signing as well, like deciding to come back officially, had anything to do with kind of maintaining the status quo in Minnesota?
I don't know that it drove things one way or the other, because it would be a better move, actually, if Aaron Rodgers had been moved to a different team, right? It would make more sense to commit to Kirk Cousins and find a way to increase your the cap space, essentially, right? Like to do what they did, to make things a little bit easier. I think that it actually would have been an even better move in that environment, right? So that's the thing, is that, like, Aaron Rodgers deciding to stay in Green Bay actually makes this a bit of a worse move, because if your goal, right, is to win the Super Bowl, right, and you need to kind of hit a bunch of check marks along the way in order to get there. One of them is obviously to make the playoffs, and the easiest way to do that is to win the division. Or I should say the simplest way to do that, not the easiest way to do that. That's the hardest way to do it. But the simplest way to do is to win the division. Your ceiling, or rather your floor for performance, is lower in a world without Aaron Rodgers in the division, right? Because you can play worse and win the division if you don't have a high-level competitor at it. And so your floor is a lot lower. And so if you've got a high-floor player, that's good, right? But you don't have to hit a very high floor. You don't have to hit your own ceiling in order to cross that threshold. But now the floor is much higher, and whether or not you can hit it depends on kind of your capabilities of hitting the top end of your variance instead of the bottom end of your variance, and that's a little bit harder. So I actually think that, if anything, it's almost the opposite. The Vikings should have been more motivated to extend Kirk Cousins with Aaron Rodgers out of the division. So I actually think that it's kind of the other way around, is that the division is less winnable, and so the Vikings should have been less committed to the idea of winning. Also, we know that the Vikings have been talking to Cousins since at least the Combine about, or I should say Cousins' agent, Mike McCartney, since about an extension that would lower his cap hit. So that's, yeah.
And this is, to be fair, this is something you had said it all signs were pointing to for months. This is something that it made perfect sense to do this exact thing, despite the fact that it was like, it made sense to see that it was happening, not necessarily that it was the good idea, just that this is where this was heading.
Reading the team, this seemed like the most likely outcome, that this would happen. Because I think for most of the offseason, I said I think there's like an 80% chance that Kirk Cousins stays in Minnesota. Now, the last couple of days before so for the last 2 days, my internal meter had moved that up to 90%, but the couple of days before that, right, in the week before, Saturday, the beginning of the non-legal tampering period, I should say, I kind of put that at 70% instead of 80%. It was moving in the other direction. That, I still think strongly that the Vikings will extend Kirk Cousins, but there were some things happening around the league and some stuff that you're hearing. Maybe a trade is a possibility. And then the next 2 days happened, and then it became Sunday, and I was like, oh yeah, they're probably, based off what I was hearing, they're probably going to extend them. So it dropped to 90%. But yeah, the entire time it never got below, to me, 70%, right? That they were, these rough estimates that don't mean anything, that they were going to extend Kirk Cousins. So yeah, it all kind of fits within that framework.
Yeah. Yep. So that's where we're at. Kirk Cousins has been extended, and we're all still going to watch the Vikings next in the fall. So that's where we're at. We'll talk more about the Kirk Cousins thing here in the mailbag, because most of the mailbag is Kirk Cousins oriented, as you would expect. But before we do, there's a couple of things we want to mention, including a signing of Harrison Phillips.
Yeah, so Harrison Phillips is a remarkably strong defensive tackle from Buffalo. A bunch of Buffalo fans really loved him. So, that's a good sign, right? If you sign a player, and fans of the team that he just came from are pretty upset by that. But you get vibes, right? You get vibes from how it might not be a good idea, because he might be a good player for Buffalo, right, in what he does and what they need for him to do, but he might not be a good player for the Vikings in terms of what he does and what they need him to do. The Vikings, critically, they lack pass rush, right? They have one pass rusher. It's the guy who hasn't seen the field in 2 years, basically. So, that's a concern. so you'd think that, kind of the next move is to bring in a pass rusher, especially if you're going to get rid of a nose tackle. And that's not really what happened. I think the PFF summary of him, which shouts to PFF, I think that their free agent tracker, which, runs 250 deep or something like that, maybe 200 deep, has a blurb on every one of their top 200 free agents. So I think it's incredible. I think it's a great way to leverage what they do there, in terms of watching every player replay. So he was the 15th ranked interior defender, according to PFF. So they, think that he's good. The role that they project for him is early down run stuffer. Phillips hasn't gotten a whole lot of pressure in Buffalo, and a decent chunk of the pressure he has gotten hasn't come by means of him winning one-on-one matchups. But that's not the role Buffalo or any other team will be paying him for. Phillips is one of the stronger players at his position in the league and can be a key component in a good run defense. Okay, great. He does not play a bunch of nose tackle. I mentioned this at the intro. So he's not a one-for-one replacement for Michael Pierce. You're probably going to see him kind of on the outside. I don't know. It's like when they signed Dalvin Tomlinson, I thought that Dalvin Tomlinson was a very good player. I liked him a lot. I did not think he was right for the Vikings because they needed a pass rusher and they got a run stuffer. We're kind of in the same spot here. The thing is, it's the whole reason that people were defending the Dalvin Tomlinson signing, right, when Michael Pierce was on the roster, was because of the way modern NFL defenses seem to be built actually to stop the pass. Because if you've got two run stuffers up front, your linebackers can actually play pass first instead of run first, and you can lighten the box, because what ends up happening is your guys that are going to fill, right, like your safeties that are deep, or your cornerbacks that are on the outside, like the slot corners that are right outside the box, the guys that are going to play a run defense role, all they need to do is get to their assigned gap, essentially, in time, right? They just need to get there in time to make it a tackle for loss or 0-yard gain, or even just a 2-yard gain on like 1st and 10, right? So you just need to get there on time. What a run stuffing defensive lineman does is not necessarily get a tackle for loss by himself, but he can appear in the gap that the running back intends to run and then try to bounce out of that gap. And the more indecision that you have, or the more that you force the running back to change directions behind the line of scrimmage, the more time you're giving those run defenders to come in. So when they realize that the quarterback has handed off the ball, they now have a little bit more time than they would have in a traditional system to get to their gap. And that was the whole defense of signing Dalvin Tomlinson, is that you get to have lighter boxes, that you get to move defenders further away from the line of scrimmage. You can defend the pass just a little bit more efficaciously. The whole take was built on Staley and Fangio style defenses kind of doing that. Well, guess what they have? They have a Fangio style defense, a Staley style defense in Minnesota. And so in theory, that's who you have. Now, I think the Staley style of defense is very good. I don't have a problem with it. I wrote about it. I like it a lot. And I really like the way that Staley thinks about it. I like the way Fangio talks about it. Ed Donatel doesn't really like say much in terms of like X's and O's. So I can't really like get into detail about what he says, but in terms of like the people who talk about it, I really like it a lot. I think it's better than a lot of defenses. But you kind of have to recognize that like the Staley defense in Los Angeles was pretty good, in part because they had like Aaron Donald. Like, I think that's not like a mistake, right? That's not an accident that you have maybe the best defensive tackle in the history of football on the defense. So I would not mind a guy who has the capability to rush the passer. Now the Vikings are limited in their menu of options, right? Like so if Harrison Phillips is he's a $6.5 million a year signing. The Vikings just saved $6.5 million against the cap by cutting Michael Phillips. They kind of have to be one for one right now until they make a couple of other moves, like the Daniel Hunter extension that we would expect to come. I assume that they're talking to teams about a trade, but that they would prioritize an extension if at all possible, or a restructure, right? But the Vikings don't have a lot of options in terms of defensive tackle, so I get that you can't necessarily have a guy that's a good pass rusher and a good run defender. So what do you prioritize? You prioritize, the guy that does the run defending, so that you can get a pass defender somewhere else, right? Like, you're not necessarily going to be able to go after Akeem Hicks. But the thing is, I bet if you take a look at some of the guys that are available, and some of these guys are not like young, right? Like Akeem Hicks and Calais Campbell, they're not like young, right? But some of the guys that are available are not bad pass rushers, right? There's a good chunk of nose tackles, right? Like you've got, BJ Hill was just re-signed, I think, by the Bengals. But you've got like some guys that can rush the passer a little bit from the nose tackle position, like Sebastian Joseph Day played for the Rams, plays for the Rams, played for the Rams. He's a free agent. Malik Collins knows how to rush the passer a little bit. Sheldon Richardson was literally just on the Vikings. So you can't have a guy do all of that. That wouldn't cost that much, but they really wanted a high level run stuffer. And they probably got him at a bit of a deal. PFF projected him as getting $8.3 million a year. He actually got $6.5 million. But I don't super love the scenario. But the vision makes sense. I don't really like that kind of prioritizing. I think if you're going to do that, I guess like Michael Pierce wasn't going to accept a restructure, which to me is kind of weird because you don't have a lot of options, man. Like you were injured, you missed a whole season, you were injured, you're at the beginning of this new contract, you're in year 2, year 3 contract. And I don't think you're going to get $10 million a year from somewhere else. And so, and if you are, power to you, you made the right move. But my guess is that you wouldn't. I would just rather just have him then, right? Because he's a better run stuffer anyway. Like I saw a couple of Vikings fans, and this is just kind of a thing that happens when a player gets released or traded or something like that. Like, yeah, he wasn't that good anyway. But like when he was on the field, he was like really good. Like the Vikings run defense was substantially better with Michael Pierce on the field. Like it's not close. I don't know. I would have probably kept him if you could have restructured him. If that's not possible, I guess it wasn't possible. But the move is unexciting, and it free agency is not over or anything like that. But like it's like it feels very much like we got a new regime just to do a bunch of the same old stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're all at this point, really. We talked about the release of Michael Pierce. Mason Cole and Xavier Woods have also moved on. Mason Cole to the Steelers, and Xavier Woods signed with the Panthers for, I think it was like 3 years.
Yeah, I think they both signed 3-year deals for like $15.75 million. Kind of funny that they both got kind of very similar deals. So at $5 million a year, they are both part of the compensatory pick formula. And that means that the Vikings are eligible for a compensatory pick because of them. Now they signed Harrison Phillips, which, the way the system works is if a guy walks away because that was the end of their contract and then they sign with a new team, that adds 1 in your tally. And then when you do the same, when you sign a guy from another team who's a compensatory free agent, not a release, but if you sign a guy from another team that was a compensatory free agent that was eligible for the comp pick formula, they cancel each other out. And so what you do is you stack up, and technically we don't know any of this, it's all secret, but Nick Corte, or Court, there's an E at the end, I don't know how to pronounce it, has done a bunch of great work on this question. He used to just write a blog about it. You had to like find it on Blogger, but now he's with Over the Cap that does the compensatory pick formula stuff. And this is how we have figured out how it works, or how he's figured out how it works, and seems to have matched up. You stack up all the compensatory free agents that you've signed and all the compensatory free agents that you've lost in order of essentially value, and the best approximation is contract value. There's other things that play a role. A player's age actually plays a role. The position they play plays a minor role. The length of the deal and the amount of guaranteed money plays a role. But the biggest factor seems to be the average money that they sign for. So you stack all them up in order of value, and they start canceling each other out, regardless of whether or not there's a mismatch. So if you're a team that loses 3 free agents that sign for $20 million a year elsewhere, like if you really just cannot retain all these really high quality players and they sign elsewhere for $20 million a year each, and all you can do is sign a bunch of players for $5 million each, you don't benefit from the fact that those players are, at least according to the market, substantially better players. And so if you sign 3 players for $5 million each and lose 3 players at $20 million each, no compensatory picks. They just cancel each other out. So right now, my understanding is that Harrison Phillips is a compensatory free agent, and Mason Cole and Xavier Woods are compensatory free agents. So the Vikings will be eligible only for one of them. The lowest compensatory pick dollar value over the last 2 years that I saw was a little bit over $2 million. They were both 7th round picks, of course, because that's how it works. But my view is that, generally speaking, anything $3 million and above is almost certainly going to get you a compensatory pick. So in this range, the $5 million range, that is about a 6th round pick, $5 million a year. So that's where the Vikings are sitting now. If other guys sign elsewhere, the Vikings sign other guys, that'll change. But right now, it looks like the Vikings have a 5th round pick in 2024 because the picks aren't announced until 2023, I think. But yeah, I don't know. It takes a while for a Petstori pick to show up. Maybe it's 2023. Either way, it's going to be in a bit. Mason Cole played well for the Vikings in the short spurts that he played. Not amazing, but much better than he did in Arizona, and in my opinion, better than he did at Michigan. But it's also very clear that he can't play guard. He's not great at snapping the ball, but the Steelers are kind of used to that from their centers, so no biggie. Xavier Woods played very well for the Vikings. This one made a lot of sense in terms of the Vikings not re-signing him. I thought that he was a good signing. He turned out to be a pretty good signing. He wasn't spectacular, but he was pretty good. But it's very clear that the Vikings have a successor in Cameron Bynum. So I think that's what drove it. And when I wrote my Vikings offseason plan, it was to let Xavier Woods hit free agency and have Cameron Bynum replace him. So that makes sense. I think it's probably good for everybody all around that Xavier Woods was able to get a year where he was able to increase his value and sign elsewhere for longer with more guaranteed after that.
Well, let's move on to the mailbag. And Drawplay Dave starts us off with, did the Vikings purposefully leak the Cousins news after Brady came back to make sure they weren't the topic of conversation?
The thing is, the regime is like very proud of Cousins. Like they just are. They like him. The regime either means the Wilfs or the front office, but they like him. So no, I don't think so. I think that they announced it as soon as they could. Like they were like, we finally got it done. Let's announce it. And what happened 3 hours ago? Wow. Dang, that's pretty big news, huh?
Yeah, we were in a meeting. We had our phones off.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like, all right, cool. I'm sure Viking Social was like, thank God. but I think the people running the team were oblivious to it. It's fortunate timing for the Vikings.
It's possible. Alex asks, there's a lot of uncertainty with a new coach and GM, but is the Cousins extension enough to give the Vikings a chance to build a roster that can compete immediately?
No, but the Vikings have a lot of potential moves that they could do essentially to compete immediately, right? Like if they, the whole plan that I built is designed around that idea that you'd end up having a competitive roster with a little bit of depth. The way that, I had a perfect mock draft and a perfect free agency. So of course it's a good team, but, I didn't have to compete with 31 other teams to sign Ben Jones, who turns out re-signed with the Titans. But, it's if you restructure Danielle Hunter, if you restructure Adam Thielen or sign an extension, do whatever you need to do with Adam Thielen, you figure out how to reduce Harrison Smith's cap hit in the same way. You end up creating about $27 million under the cap to work with to do all that. Now, I didn't end up cutting Michael Pierce. The Vikings did, and so that's $6.5 million in cap space. But the reason I didn't cut Michael Pierce is because when you cut a player, you have to replace him. And to me, I didn't think that was necessarily worth it. I just talked about why I didn't think it was worth it. But they essentially switched defensive tackles for free. So all of the other moves that I'm talking about still need to be made in order to get to 27 or 30 or whatever under the cap. And that team can compete. Like that team is going to be better than most teams. Your next question, Alex, is, and should we be trying to do that? And I think probably not. I think that the Vikings should focus on building a really great young core that they can eventually insert a quarterback into and compete with that. That's got a higher ceiling. That's my thought, but I certainly get the logic. The thing is, like, a new head coach and a new front office, you've got a lot of leeway, man. Like, you've got a lot of leeway. Maybe they just did not like this year's draft class, even though they told us at the combine outright that they did. That they liked this quarterback class. Maybe they don't. If they don't, and they want to save their jobs, I guess it like makes sense to do that from that perspective. Like if we're assuming that the Wilfs didn't put any pressure on them, if we say that like, hey, Kevin O'Connell has one shot at a quarterback. So whenever they get a new quarterback, that's his shot. And he doesn't want to spend it on this draft class. Okay, well, if you get rid of Cousins and you get, say, I don't know, 2 second-round picks, if all that happens, and which is a higher price than I had initially projected, so if that ends up happening, props to them. But if you get rid of Cousins, you get 2 second-round picks. Um, then and then you don't draft a quarterback that year, it just feels weird. And maybe the Wilfs don't want that. And then they'd ask questions like, "Hey, we would ask questions like, "Hey, why did you get rid of your quarterback and not have a quarter? Like they're just going to compete with Kellen Mond this year, and maybe that's not your shot, and maybe you draft a quarterback next year. But like, if you only get one shot, you probably want to wait until it makes sense to take that shot, and maybe that's next year. It just like it feels like it'd be easier to make that shot if you were not consciously trying to. I'm not saying tank necessarily, but it's easier to make that shot if you don't have Cousins as your quarterback than if you do. Yeah, I think that's. I don't think that they should be trying to do that, but this is. I forget what the name of the game theory problem of this is, but this is when the incentives of an organization and the incentives of an individual agent within the organization are at cross purposes. Their job is to try to not get fired, not to make the organization the best possible organization. Sometimes that aligns. A lot of times it does, but sometimes it doesn't.
Raul asks, how exactly do the new GM and coaching staff evaluate the roster before free agency and the draft without seeing the roster on the field? Is it simply tape study? Is there any intel left over from Spielman and Zimmer?
I think it's called the principal agent problem. Anyway, the answer to this question is tape study. Now, they do have notes from the front office because, first of all, any documentation done by the coaches in the front office is like Vikings property, right? It would technically be illegal for them to destroy it. I can't imagine that they don't like take a bunch of their notes with them and that the Vikings probably don't sue them for that. But like, there's going to be a lot of stuff in the computer database that like tells you about those players and stuff like that. That is just Vikings properties. They click over that. But also they retained almost the entire front office. Really, they just got rid of Spielman. So like the operations staff, whose job it is to both, evaluate the rest of the league and evaluate the Vikings internally, all of their stuff is still there. But I think primarily the thing that's important is that they watched a bunch of tape. Honestly, I think that's it. And that's how they evaluate the roster. In much the same way that they evaluate opposing rosters. They watch the tape. Now, they do have a bit of an advantage in that when they watch the tape, they can, talk to maybe a quality control guy who worked for the old regime is going to work for this regime and say, hey, do you happen to know what the play call was here? Right? Like they've got a little bit of an advantage of tape study versus studying an opponent. So there's that. But yeah, it's basically tape study and like their experience within the league. Like they might be familiar with some of these players for one reason or the other.
Jack Rackham asks, the assumption with Kirk's extension is that they are in, quote, win now mode. If that doesn't happen in a meaningful way in the next 2 years, what does that or should that mean for our new head coach and GM?
It depends on how involved they are in the decision to keep Cousins. So if, for example, the general manager wanted to trade away Cousins and the head coach did not want to, and this turns out to be a catastrophic failure, right? Then the general manager should not be held responsible for that because his instincts were right. The head coach maybe should be held responsible. The only way that we know how a head coach is held responsible is that they're fired. And I don't know that means they have to be fired, but it might have to alter the dynamic of the relationship that they have, right? That, at quarterback, the head coach maybe should be a little bit more differential with the general manager going forward for a little bit. That could be how that works out, right? But if both of them were in lockstep and they decided, yeah, absolutely it should be Kirk Cousins, and that turns out to be a catastrophic failure, then they should be put on the hot seat, right? And how they handle those 2 years should determine whether or not they continue to help run the team or run the team. I feel like very weird about the idea that after 2 years we'd say, if it's not a success, they should be fired. Especially because the Wilfs are very committed to this idea of having a very stable ownership that models itself off the Rooneys, that only has had like 4 head coaches or something insane like that. But some level of introspection needs to happen where you kind of question if they're the right people for the job. And if they handle those 2 years very poorly, you let them go. If they handled them well, but they just made one catastrophic decision, maybe you just kind of move on and draft another quarterback. But yeah, it really depends on how that was executed, the decision to extend Kirk, because if both Kevin O'Connell and Adolfo-Mensah were kind of like whatever on it, and the Wolves were like, no, we should try and see this work and see what happens, then the Wolves should probably give some assurance to the general manager and that coach, like, if this doesn't work out, you're fine. We'll pick it back up and do it the way you want to. I hired you for a reason. But, it really kind of depends on what drove the decision in terms of who should be held responsible for the decision.
All right, next question is from Devin Ruvnik, who asks, even with Kirk's extension, doesn't it feel like the team will draft a QB high? Void years coupled with the fact that the deal is up when they have to pay Justin Jefferson makes me think they'll want a quarterback on a rookie deal then.
The thing is, by the time Justin Jefferson is up for a contract, they probably won't have some players that are pretty expensive on the roster, right? Like, I would not expect Adam Thielen to be on the roster in 2025 just because he's declining a little bit, but more importantly, he's like 32 now, right? And so, in 2 years when he's hitting his age 33, like it's time to. Thanks, Joe Mauer. It's time to go. It's probably it. So some of those expensive, pieces won't be around. Like the Packers will probably find a way to keep Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers together, right? And Aaron Rodgers is a bigger cap hit than Kirk Cousins, even though it was a new deal. So like they'll probably find a way, right? I don't think that this necessarily means the team will draft a quarterback high this year, right? Like I can see what you mean, but I think that they want to win now, and that might mean getting a first-round pick that can contribute right away. And, there's a lot of holes in the roster. They don't have starters at cornerback. They don't have a starter at linebacker. They need an edge rusher opposite Danielle Hunter, right? Like there's like a lot of stuff they need to do. And I don't know if wasting's the right word, but if your goal is to win now, then that's the best way to put it. You'd be wasting a first-round pick in terms of your 2022 prospects. Now, rookies, they don't play very well, right? First-round rookies tend to be below average starters on average. But, a below average starter is better than like a replacement level corner, basically. So I don't think that there's much of a feeling that I'm getting from this that they'll draft a quarterback high. But man, if they do, it sounds like fun. I'd love to tweet about quarterback controversies. I'd love to say at the end of like day 8 of training camp, hey, Malik Willis was 5 of 8, Kirk Cousins was 6 of 8, but Malik Willis hit a 40-yard bomb. You decide. It sounds like fun. We're going to get a lot of retweets.
It invokes the tweet circus.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. God, draft a quarterback, man. I need a job.
Ty asks, has there been a less enjoyable / likable stretch of Vikings football since 2017? Everything about the team feels so cold and mechanical, like I'm living in an empty lighthouse.
That's good. Ty, do you write for a living?
That is pure poetry, actually.
That was good.
Well, the problem is that your sample size is so incredibly small.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a big part of it. Is that it might feel like the team is not operating itself as if it has a lot of personality, which is kind of a weird way to put it. But like, obviously, organizations themselves don't have personalities. The actors within the organization do, but the kind of uniform team culture, the way the organization moves as a result of all those agents, that gives it a sense of personality. And the sense of personality you had in 2009 was that the team was going to do anything. I would swear right now, but you don't want the iTunes explicit rating. But the team was effing going for it, man. They're crazy. They made the playoffs with a backup quarterback. Let's go. Let's get a guy. Let's get Brett Favre. Like, that's a personality, right? So, like, that team had a personality. Now, I wouldn't say that, like, the team personality in, like, 2013 was, like, dynamic and splashy and fun. But certainly I think that there was an idea that there was the possibility of greatness, right? It did not turn out. But there was a possibility, right? And so, you like, hey, Adrian Peterson can get another 2,000 yards. What's going to stop him? Like, no other running back has gotten consecutive 2,000-yard seasons, but no other running back has done what Adrian Peterson's done. Let's do that, shore up the defense a little bit, and take it to the Packers. Like, there's an idea there, right? I get the nature of this question. I I don't know if I agree with it, mostly because we're like a day into free agency as we're recording. And I understand that the biggest move of free agency just happened, right? For the Vikings. Like, it's unlikely that, the Vikings are just going to be like, hey man, Devontae Adams just hit the market. Yeah, we're signing him. We're signing Devontae Adams. It's Justin Jefferson and Devontae Adams and a guy you might have heard of called Adam Thielen. Those are our three wide. Let's go. Right? Like, that's probably not going to happen. But there's still like a possibility that you could end up having a little bit of fun on this team. And I think like we can't really say much about this until the games start, because if the offense is good, that's a watchable football team. And the offense is going to throw the ball more, like than the non DiFilippo Zimmer offenses. They're going to throw the ball more. And so you're probably going to end up with a better offense, and it's going to be fun to argue about it, right? Like, it's going to be fun to think about it and talk about it and say, hey, they might be a machine, but like they're kind of a well-oiled machine. Like that 2018 Rams team that was kind of just a machine that didn't have Jalen Ramsey and didn't have some of the personalities on defense that they have. They were a machine, but they were a pretty well-oiled machine, and it was fun to see them do some stuff. So I get it, but we're pretty early in the game here.
Just as a side note, do you think that Adam Thielen is still a Viking by the time training camp starts?
Yes, I think so. I think that the only reason that the Vikings aren't going to try to be a 3-wide team this year is just because the talent that they have elsewhere at tight end and fullback is going to demand that they be a 2-wide team and be creative about that. But I think they definitely want to have receivers, and I think they're going to try and figure out a way to make Adam Thielen fit onto the team. So I think he will be.
Let's go to our next question, which is going to be from Norm Charlatan.
Norm Charlatan.
Some people are calling Kirk's extension the Hepola curse, after the independent candidate for governor called for Kirk to be traded. Who would you like to see Corey Hepola advocate to trade next in hopes they might actually get a contract extension with the Vikings? Reverse curses are still curses. They still work.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, Danielle Hunter, of course, right? Get a contract extension out of him. Reduce the cap hit from 26 to 13. If anyone's unaware, 2 Vikings-related personalities are running for governor. I don't know who the Democratic candidate is yet. Maybe I should. but yeah, Corey Hepola is running as an independent. His thing is unity. Details to come, I guess. And Matt Burke is also running. So that's going to be a fun governor race. Wait, Tim Walz is probably just going to run again. I don't know why I said that, but but that's what we got. This is the state for those kind of shenanigans, right? Like the body, right?
Yep, you immediately think of 99-2000 with Jesse Ventura. Yep. What can you do? But yeah.
I mean, we've had like strong runs from independents for the gubernatorial position for like a long time.
Yeah.
But I just prefer Jesse ran again.
let's do that. And actually, can Hepola just make a declaration on that? Let's go to Kirk Marsh, who asks, is it blind optimism to believe the no trade clause on Cousins' contract is more about giving Kirk more autonomy in a trade than keeping him? Also, is it possible the 2-year deal makes him more desirable in the market?
I don't think that they signed him to trade him. I'll say that. But no, I don't think that's blind optimism. Anytime a no trade clause is announced in a contract, all that tells me is that it gives the player control. The thing is, like, it's almost fake to me, right? Because a quarterback is not going to get traded to a team they don't want to be on anyway. And so the no trade clause being in there is just potentially a signal, right? Like that you can send, right? Which is that we're committed and we're not going to trade him. Cousins has in every new contract he signed a no trade clause. Now, in the extension that he signed with the Vikings 2 years ago, there was a no trade clause, but it was essentially a 1-year extension. They weren't going to going to trade him that year, so who cares? But yeah, it just like Deshaun Watson has a no trade clause, and we're talking about what teams he's going to get traded to. He just has to waive it for a specific team, and there you go. So the Vikings can shop Kirk Cousins all they want, despite a no trade clause. It just means that Cousins gets a veto. Cool. That's all it means.
Next question is from Kenneth Allen, who asks, which Arif fate is worse, being shot by James or being enraptured by Kirk's, quote, fat dumpy?
This is related to the Dropplay comic, so anyone unfamiliar with the lore, check out thedropplay.com. No, the worst fate is the second one, which I'm not going to repeat aloud because I don't want those words to leave my mouth.
You don't want to have that to be something that could be taken out of context and edited in some way that could... Yeah, that's got cancelable written all over it. Thus why I said it. Alexander asks, what potential free agent move would alter what the Vikings do in the draft the most?
Oh, that's interesting. I think signing an edge rusher of some sort. So like, Za'Darius Phillips is one that some people are talking about because A, people are familiar with him. He's in the division, but B, the Vikings signed the outside linebackers coach. I think his name is Mike Smith, from the Packers to the Vikings. And so he has a relationship with his position coach here. And doing that, I think, would make it very difficult to project an edge rusher for the Vikings. I don't think signing a cornerback would prevent the Vikings from drafting a cornerback because they need 2 or 3 cornerbacks. And so that's kind of a tough one to build around. But I think that's one. I think if they signed a guard, I don't know. The guards just like flew off the market at the beginning of free agency. So I don't even know who's left anymore because Ben Jones is gone. I think Brandon Scherf is gone. 2 more. Laken Tomlinson is gone. I thought that would have been like crazy interesting to me. Well, let me take a look at what PFF says. Who are the guards and centers?
Yeah, it was weird today just to start off the legal tampering period. It was just like every offensive lineman was just getting grabbed immediately.
So Connor Williams, I don't believe is signed anywhere. He's a guard center. James Daniels is a guard center. I don't think he is signed anywhere. I think Austin Corbett is gone. So, yeah, there's not like a ton of options, but that would change things too, because in my fake Vikings offseason, I drafted a guard in the first round, which, is very me. I love doing that. I'm all about that. But I grabbed Zion Johnson and it's possible that the Vikings do that. I don't anticipate it. I think they're going to probably grab a corner, but if they signed a guard, it would narrow the range of options and also prevent them from probably drafting a guard in the first 3 rounds. So those are probably the 2 options: an edge rusher like Za'Darius Smith, a guard like, I don't know, James Daniels, who's like very much built for his own scheme. Those are the players that would do it. I don't know that they could afford James Daniels, but it's possible.
Ed Donatello asks, what is the new most hilarious outcome for this year, given the moves the Vikings have made so far?
Hilarious outcome?
Super Bowl. After all the bitching and complaining about Kirk Cousins, his contract being too much, the percentage question about his cap hit, all of that, the most hilarious thing for me would be a Super Bowl run.
You're right. That would be fun. I can't think of a funnier one. That's good. I was trying to think of like, what if they lose to a specific team, and then I have to figure out like who their schedule is, and I just don't care enough about the schedule right now for me to try and figure that out.
They retire both Brady and Rodgers in the playoffs.
Oh, wow. That's good.
That would be good. I don't know if
is there an AFC quarterback that they could retire in the Super Bowl?
They beat Trubisky in the Super Bowl.
Oh, pick 6 from thrown to the left.
Thrown to the left, God. Obviously. That's how that works. Oh my God.
Where's the Super Bowl? Las Vegas, right?
I believe so.
Oh,
fantastic. There you go. Glad we could do that. Beef Brewski asks, how might you, Arif, alter the combine to provide better information for player evaluators? Are there specific things you'd like to see change? And for James, just for fun, what event would you like to see added to the combine for sheer entertainment value? Players cutting wrestling promos?
One thing, I saw a couple of interviews with various strength coaches, and one thing that seems to be somewhat common among strength and conditioning coaches is to get rid of the bench press and replace it with a squat. Now, the issue I have is that max squat seems to correlate better with football play in a lot of different ways. It it tests your ability to use the whole kinetic chain. You play football from the ground, obviously, but also very specifically, leg strength matters a lot in almost every position. It's much more functional strength. The bench press actually correlates very little at every position. Obviously, some position more than others have a stronger correlation, but it's all very weak in terms of relationship. And so it's not a very useful test. The problem is, like, a max squat might be a really excellent evaluative tool, but if there is money on the line, some players absolutely going to end their career at the combine trying to hit a personal best. Like, that's gonna happen. So that's the issue. But I do think that some sort of squat related strength activity would be good. So I think that would be a good change. I also think having I don't know if they put chips in the players at the combine. I don't think they do, but if they did, I would like the data to be released. Either way, let's have them do that. Let's put the chips in the players so that we can construct essentially more useful 40 times. And by that I mean get rid of the uncertainty about the player's start. Because the way the combine is run is, I explained this, I think, on the show 2 weeks ago, right, James, about the half electronic timing?
I believe so, yeah. But I think it was like a week ago, yes.
Yeah, a week ago, yeah. I don't like that it's off of the first player's move. I prefer off of like their first moment of movement forward instead of like a superficial movement that doesn't matter. And so having it so you can standardize that, I think would be great, especially because you could get a better sense of how fast the first step is. Like that, like you could probably code that pretty well, even with just one chip, because of the way that your body moves off its first couple of steps. It's not smooth enough to make those first steps indistinct from each other. So having a first step calculation, and if you've got the player's weight, which you do because they were weighed at the combine, you can generate like a force calculator off of that first step. And so you don't have to use the 10 split, which is extremely useful and notoriously unreliable in terms of its measurement is unreliable, but its application is very useful. And I would love to see first step and second step data. That would rule. And then you could get a player's top speed. You could get how quickly does the player get up to their top speed. Like that seems so cool to me. Like, if you can get a player to like a good top speed for a player to get to is like 19 miles per hour for a skill position. Now the top ones can run up to like 21 miles per hour. I mean, that's what you get from like Tyreek Hill on like one of his highlight plays, right? But if we can get time to 19 miles per hour for a skill position player, I don't see how that wouldn't absolutely rule. Like I imagine that has an application. And if it doesn't, I would like to find out, right? Like I would like to be able to test all that. So those are the things I would love to have at the combine, is to have the kind of data off of just the 40 even, but a squat. Now there is another, instead of the squat, I have seen, and the reason I didn't mention this earlier is because a lot of my information comes from marketing. And so it is therefore unreliable. But there is something interesting about what one company is doing where, they have the player jump the vertical. It's still the vertical leap, but they jump off of a pad. And the reason that that's important is because the pad has data that it tracks, and it can track the amount of force that you generate when you jump up. And it can track how long it takes for you to do certain things. It can essentially calculate how high you jump based off of the amount of time it takes for your feet to hit the ground again, so long as you standardize, that's the word I was looking for, the way the player jumps, which you can do with the combine. And you can probably provide some similar data as a squat does. But the only reason I didn't mention is because, it's mostly marketing. So I don't know if it's any good, but they claim that a bunch of colleges have been using this, and they've been really successful at finding ways to target, how to improve a player's, movement skills to improve their football. So who knows? But, just kind of being more open to that. The thing is, you need to build years of data to see if that's useful, but strength coaches are like very confident in the bench being bad and the squat being good. And it turns out the data says that they're right about the bench being bad. So I would at least like to see some element of a squat that still ensures player safety of some way. So obviously an agent will advise a player to not try and hit their PR at the combine, but some players will try to do it anyway, right? And so finding a way to avoid doing that would be fantastic.
Next question is going to be, actually, let's go back to the Beef Brewski thing for a moment. So what event would I like to see added? I mentioned on Twitter, if we could get some sort of like a rock and jock basketball thing going with like the triple hoop above it worth like 25 points. Because you hear all the time, maybe all the tight ends just have a pickup game of basketball, since all the tight ends play basketball according to Chris Collinsworth. So
of course
we do something like that. I'd be in for like competitive dodgeball. I think that would be fun. But wrestling promos should also be considered. Because they're not doing the Wonderlick anymore, I feel like this is a good way to show off how they're going to be in front of the media. The media is a very important part of the whole football experience and selling your team. Do you want a guy who's terrible on the mic?
You got it, James.
This is how this works. Also, the fact that all sports interviews basically sound like the guy from Letterkenny did this series of hockey post-game interviews, that it's just the same phrase over and over again, just in a slightly different way, and it's really funny. It's worth checking out. Nolan Kaler asks, for North Code, why tender Greg Joseph, who also got tendered today on Monday, why tender Greg Joseph when you could sign Justin Medlock? In other words, why put an offer on a Hyundai when you could have had a Mercedes?
So for most of the North Code segments, I will try to look up the CFL player or the CFL team in question so that I can pretend to answer. I did not do that this time, and I am comfortable in my choices here. I don't know, man. Let's assume you're right.
Yeah. Kyle Slaby asks, he forwarded this particular Twitter question. It was, have any of y'all received an internet insult that still sticks with you? Like they got you good and you couldn't even say anything.
This question is a trap and I will not be answering it.
Yeah, it'd be like me revealing my biggest pet peeve. And that's a terrible idea. And I would never do that on on a call, on a recording that Don from Ohio could access easily.
Yeah, you would never do that, James.
No, I would never do that in a way that it would be recorded and put out. I'm aware of what kryptonite you have. I'm saying that I would never actively put that out.
Right.
Glitchy Lauren asks, question for Arif's Corner. Listeners have been putting Arif in various corners of their own choosing, but what corner does Arif want to speak from? Anime corner is his obvious number one choice. So what comes after that?
I don't know what anime is, so I can't speak to that.
Oh, but please!
I've never heard of that. What are you talking about? I don't know what that is. It sounds like something for degenerates. It sounds like something I wouldn't do. But I've never heard of anime in my life. But probably a politics corner, right? But that's not what the thing is. And also, I have a dead podcast devoted to politics. So clearly, I pay a lot of attention to the podcasting side of that. Other than that, I don't know. Like TV shows and movies seem like the natural thing, but like half the time when someone submits a show about a TV show or movie, I haven't watched it. So like clearly it's not that big of a passion of mine. Media, it would be a media corner, and I would just talk about how much I love Horizon Zero Dawn this week, or next week I'd be talking about, hey man, you remember the 90s? Eve 6 followed me on Twitter. They're a really cool band. Let's talk about the discography.
While we're speaking of media, have you had a chance to see the Bomani Jones TV show?
No, I haven't. See, this is what I mean. But I really want to, yeah.
I watched most of it. I skipped a good portion of the interview. You cannot pay me to be interested. Well, you can. You just won't pay me to be interested in Stephen A. Smith. I can't. I'm just not interested in him as an interview. But I will say it did harken back to the days of Bomani and Jones.
Okay. Oh, if they can capture that energy.
There are glimpses. If they continue this way, he'll find his swag, he'll find his rhythm for it, and it'll be good. It just needs a little bit more polish, but I did enjoy what I saw today. Chris asks, so let's say Arif succeeds in learning how to kick field goals and is like 90% from 50 to 55 yards and 100% under the 50 kicking in a field by himself. The Vikings offer you Greg Joseph's salary, but you get it at the end of the season only if you don't, quote, lose a game for them. Do you take it? And yes, this does include blocking on kickoffs.
All right, so the thing is, my answer to this question would have absolutely been yes if it didn't include the clause kicking in a field by himself. Like, you're saying I hit 90% from 3 in practice? Wow, I'm going to kill it, right? Like, that's what that sounds like, right? So my threshold is to not, quote unquote, lose a game, which includes failing to make a tackle on kickoffs. It includes missing a key kick at the end of the game, or whatever, right? If I'm kicking well in a field by himself, I'm not even kicking well in practice, right? Because I don't know if the trajectory of the ball is enough to get over the offensive line, right? Like, I absolutely will not take this deal, right? Because normally I could say, if I do this and I don't make any money from it, but the Vikings are like housing and feeding me. That's not a concern. And I miss some critical kicks or critical moments in games and I'll get that salary. I could go to the Athletic and be like, hey, I played on a football team for a year. You should probably give me a raise. I could probably do something with this, right? So I could probably end up making more money. The thing is, I'm a 5'4", 160 pound, let's say, human on a football.
In case you were wondering what it sounded like when Arif lies, there you go.
Well, okay, but I haven't weighed myself in 2 weeks.
Your hesitation said it all. I wasn't going to say how much I was going to weigh. I was just saying that this, your hesitation.
I weigh more than 150 and less than 170. How about that? Does that sound good?
That is a range.
Yeah. 165 to 155. See, so 160 is fine, right? So anyway, I'm 5'4", and I am lighter than Ace Sanders. I'm lighter than the lightest football player. How does that sound, right? On a football field, if I don't make every kick a touchback, I'm dead. I'm done. I'm gone. If one person, even if it's a foul, who cares, right? If one person tries to block a kick and hits my knee evaporates. I don't have the stabilizing muscles to handle that. So the risk isn't that I don't make any money. The risk is that I die. I'm just going to not do that. Now, if you said, hey, Arif, you kick 90% from 50 to 55 and 100% under 50 in games, 100% I take this offer, right? Because the chance that I can do that and not make touchbacks on every single kick is astronomically low. I'd probably be able to make touchbacks. So I probably don't have to worry about that much. And I only have to worry about the, blocked kicks or whatever, right? And mind you, a blocked kick would still kill me. But the difference is I am now weighing the risk of that versus $2 million instead of I get to weigh the risk of an 8% raise versus dying on the field. And so that is now the risk tolerance I'm comfortable with. But in a field by myself, no way am I making kicks.
Yeah, that becomes a bit more difficult as a result. Dr. Aaron Matson asks, what was your favorite part of this year's Cousins Speculation Palooza? And given the shortness of the extension, what are you most looking forward to when we do this all again next year?
I think that, like, if it doesn't work out this year, the Vikings are just gonna. I don't think that there's another extension after this. Is what I'm gonna say. My favorite part of this year's Speculation Palooza was arguing with people about Cousins' trade value. Sorry, Beef Brewski.
In particular. Also, from Dr. Aaron Matson, for James and Reeves Schadenfreude corner, which move made you laugh more? Washington trading for Wentz or Pittsburgh signing Trubisky? Has there ever been a QB and an owner that deserved each other more in a bad way than Wentz and Dan Snyder?
The Pittsburgh signing Trubisky stuff was pretty funny, especially because we're going to get a question later in the mailbag that made me keel over laughing. But Washington trading for Wentz cannot beat that. That is so funny.
Yeah,
by itself.
I cannot agree with you more on this. Because it not only did it have like, oh, that's funny, he's on his third team now. It had the Washington people being fleeced. It had because they were going to release the guy. It was obvious.
At the combine, the general manager was like, yeah, we're trying to find out how to get rid of this dude. And Washington was like, oh, he's on the market? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, who needs draft picks? Yeah, absolutely. We'll make this work. Do you need a second in there too? We can talk. Let's not just because you were going to release him doesn't mean there's no real value there. Come on.
The picture of Ron Weasley in a Gryffindor Quidditch uniform captioned Carson Wentz gets to wear a Commander's uniform for the first time killed me.
And Colts fans were loving the fact that they unloaded him. Philly fans were laughing because they're going to be catching catches from him again. It was great. It truly brought the NFC East together in a way that hasn't been seen in forever. Mm-hmm. It was good times all around.
It's just like the idea that the most detestable franchise in the NFL, a tough competition to win, by the way, a very tough competition, but also not close, grabs like my nemesis quarterback. Oh my God, it's so perfect. And I think my favorite part was when someone said to me, hey, Wentz was really only bad in a couple of games. He wasn't that bad of a quarterback. And so I just linked him to the Colts subreddit. Oh, beautiful.
Just amazing. That one pick they like to throw on that made absolutely no sense. And I realized just saying that aloud makes it a little bit hard to nail down.
Yeah, it's a little bit vague. Do you mean the one at the end of the game? Sorry, no, that's 2 or 3 other ones. Okay.
That pick six. Wait, which one?
The pick six. Which one?
Yeah.
God.
Just good stuff. Good stuff. Let's go to Ron, who asks, is it okay to sample a grape at a grocery store to see if you want to buy them?
Yes. Didn't Marge Simpson get arrested for this?
There was something about the grape that she was guilted. I think she was guilted.
She felt guilty.
Yeah,
that was it.
She was guilted by Lisa to pay for them. So yeah.
Lisa. Sometimes I'm really on board with Lisa, and then she's a cop. Yeah, no, it's fine. But limit yourself to one. I don't know where the line is, but if you limit yourself to one, you're not going to cross it.
Yeah, one, not one.
Same with olives.
One, not one handful. That's where that goes. Derek McKenzie asks, question for James's degenerate gambling corner. Sure.
It's a good corner to have.
It's I took it over when Dusty decided to no longer be on the show doing degenerate gambling.
Remember when we had a sponsorship from a DFS company that no longer exists?
Yep. Good times. Didn't get a dime. They probably didn't either, which explains why they're closed. Is Spanish 21 worth playing? So I had never heard. This is a version of blackjack. I had never heard of Spanish 21 until this question, and I did a quick Google, and there was a great video that was put out by a casino explaining how it worked, and you could tell that they were trying extra hard to convince you that it was easy to play, because every time you watched the players get 21. Like, it was without fail, it was always set up like that. So subconsciously you think, oh, well, I can this is totally easy. I'll totally win this. It was nuts. Spanish 21 is different than regular bar style blackjack in a couple of very big ways, including the fact that you can double down at any time.
What?
Which is nuts.
What?
Yep. Sure can.
What? Sorry, I'm just so.
You can be four. You can be 4 in and decide now you're going to double down. That is nuts. Also, what's fun is you can take back. It's almost like an insurance bet. You can take at some points. Depending on the card, you can actually take back your double down too. You just have to sacrifice what you'd already put in.
What?
It's I'll provide the links for it to go into the show notes. It's nuts. There's also additional payouts for how many cards it takes to hit 21. Like there is one that exists for like a 5 card run and a 7 card run. And if you get 7, 7, and 7, that pays out something like 3 to 1, 4 to 1, like something absurd. So like there are things that go along with it. And there's ways for you to like defend your bet. It's weird. It is weird. And I was watching it and I was like, my first thought was, I really wonder if Dusty's heard of it. Dusty's a degenerate gambler. Why would he not know anything about it? So I messaged him, and all I got were just a series of ah-ha-has. It's like, what on earth? It's like, because you can split aces like 3 ways for no good reason. You can double down on a 3 and a 10 and land on a 14. It's Dusty called it simultaneously sad and hilarious, like a clown's funeral.
That rules.
This is a great way to lose all of your money. I can't imagine playing this game more than twice. I can see playing it the first time. I can see trying to learn from my mistakes the second, and staying the hell away from it the third. But if you haven't played it that first and the second, and you are in fact a degenerate gambler, now is your time. Don from Ohio asks, since the wind blows from left to right in Heinz Field, is Trubisky the perfect quarterback for the Steelers to sign?
This is that question. God damn, that's so good, man. That's so good. Yeah, no, for sure. Claypool lines up on the right side of the field. I believe Deontay Johnson lines up on the left side more often than not. So keep that in mind when you're drafting in fantasy.
God. Yeah, for those who are going to look into Trubisky as a backup, you know what really sucks is Roethlisberger was never really a QB1 in fantasy, but if you needed a backup, you could have done a hell of a lot worse.
Oh, that's true.
There were some years where he carried me during freak injury weeks and the waiver wire was always empty, Roethlisberger found a way to carry and manage the game, which is all you want from your backup, really, is just a game manager who's not going to who's not going to make you lose the game. So yeah, it turned into that. So there were some there were a couple of games that he was able to pull through for me. So I begrudgingly have a small amount of respect for that. But yeah, I don't think Trubisky's going to be able to do the same. But who knows? This may be just the place to prove Matt Nagy was the problem. Yeah, that silences me not believing it either. Don from Ohio asks, if the Vikings are in win now mode, what mode are the Vikings fans in?
Not this again mode.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, it's just like resignation mode.
There's a lot of, we saw all this last year. It's not good. Finally, from Don from Ohio, he asks, favorite Scott Hall / Razor Ramon match from his career. Wrestler Scott Hall, otherwise known as Razor Ramon, passed away here around 7 this evening Central after dying a lot earlier than would have been expected, considering he was actually doing well as far as sobriety and all of that. Complications from hip surgery, I believe, was the official word on it. Had like 4 heart attacks in a row in an evening. That's rough. Do you have anything for this? Because I've got 1 or 2, I'm sure.
I don't.
So 1993 Royal Rumble would have been Razor Ramon versus Bret Hart for the WWF Championship. Much better than the Rumble that year, which had Yokozuna throwing out Macho Man Randy Savage because he tried to pin him during the Royal Rumble. It was a much better that was a thing. It didn't make sense then. It doesn't make sense now. But their match was better than the Rumble itself, and it was really, really good. I remember watching the 1-2-3 Kid Razor Ramon match on what had to be like the second Monday Night Raw, the second episode of that, when the 1-2-3 Kid won. And it was a giant like surprise and everything. Everything after that for the two of them was terrible, but that match was good. And of course the famous Bash at the Beach 1996 when it was revealed that Hulk Hogan was the third man and all of that. But that was probably it. If you get an opportunity, there is there's an old AWA thing, which would have been the wrestling organization out of Minneapolis during many decades, but this decade in particular was the 80s, and they did something called the Wrestle Rock Rumble. It's what came out before the Super Bowl Shuffle.
Oh, okay.
And it is hilariously 80s bad. And it's all about the local wrestlers that were in the Minneapolis territory at the time, and there's a couple of like big names. Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig's in there. You have Scott Hall. You have Shawn Michaels. Marty Jannetty's in there. Larry Zbyszko is in there. A number of big names over for like wrestling history were all in Minneapolis at the time, and and most of them attempt to rap, and it is bad. But there's a video out there from like a shoot interview of Scott Hall watching that back. And just pointing out, I used to date her after a while. This scene was really funny because the guy who was in it couldn't read, and they were trying to make him read lines from this thing, and he was getting all upset. And we're just like, I don't know what to tell you, dude. It's worth checking out Scott Hall's reaction to watching the Wrestle Rock Rumble and then trying to rap back his lines like 30 years later. So, but anyway, that's it for that. So that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. We will be back again soon. We gave you a bit of a bonus episode just because there was a bunch of news coming out here. I don't know if we'll be back next week or the week after, but we will be back soon. And the Patreon people are getting a bonus episode later this week. Arif, what do you have to plug?
So I've got a piece kind of blueprinting the Vikings offseason. We'll see how close the Vikings follow that blueprint. Already it's gone awry, but that's what makes it fun. But in terms of cap space left, actually, it's the exact same as I expected. So we'll see how that goes. That's over The Athletic, theathletic.com /author/Arif-Hassan. That'll be in the show notes. Other than that, it's just going to be kind of updates on what the Vikings are doing. We've already got a piece on Harrison Phillips up, written by Chad Graff, about kind of what he provides and all that. Yeah, I mean, as the Vikings kind of make moves in free agency, and as the free agency period goes on, I'll be reacting. So there's that, and then we're going to start the mock draft tracker soon, which is basically just draft news. That'll be me, Ben Standing, and a couple of other writers at The Athletic. You can find that there. That'll happen after free agency is over.
All right, so that'll be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We'll be back soon. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember that the Vikings are not to be trusted. And we will see you soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of The Athletic, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed, at NorseCodeDN, or my personal account, at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.
Hard work pays off. Dreams come true. Bad times don't last, but bad guys do.